Cheers, thank you. Good evening. Some of you have noticed we got some paper. It's really impressive how some folk have sat on them and others have actually started reading them. This will take no more than about 5 minutes if we're fast. We'll look at it, and that's a good use, by the way. We'll look at it later on, but I just want to give you a brief introduction about what this is about. So we build this as Agile. But before we get into Agile, one of the things that I think I'm coming across, I do work with the Agile Business Consortium in London, is the world of collaborative partnerships. If you look at an Agile team, if people aren't collaborating, it's not going to work too well. Now the question is, so Agile coaches or Scrum Masters, they naturally get the idea that your team needs to work together very effectively and the different skill sets that come together. But what's fascinating is, not all of them know how to sort out the world of collaboration. Collaboration. So if it's not working effectively, how do you actually bring a team together to collaborate more effectively? And that's what this is trying to help people do. Edgar Schein may or may not be a name that you guys know about. It depends on where you've sort of played in learning space. But the bottom line is, we often hear the word resistance to change. And we hear it, I do a lot of work with the merger and acquisition space as well, and we often hear the statement, people are just resistant, they won't change. I would like to suggest that's bunkum. If you have people who perceive not to be changing, it's probably the way you're looking at what is getting in their way to change or their desire to change. You haven't seen it yourself. So often those who indict others as being resistant would really benefit from looking in the mirror, and that's a bit of a challenge I'm throwing out to the group. But it's been my experience having been involved in many change initiatives. But ultimately it's about culture, and you can't really have an Agile organization team unless the culture is there to support it. You can attempt it, but it will decay at some point. So moving on, what's got me here, interesting journey. I ended up going to the Agile Business conference last year. I was then asked to go to the British Computer Society, and we had 35 people go through 2 parts. I've got 2 sheets. You guys are only going to have to suffer one. But we look at actually what's called the environmental dynamic and the group dynamic. And you can see the spread. Each dot represents a perspective that someone has about the team that they work with or they supervise. And you've got quite a spread going on. The chart we're going to look at later on is slightly different. The group dynamic consists of 2 components, a learning and a control dynamic, and that's what we're going to be looking at in here. So what I'd like to suggest, there's a booklet, which we're not going to use. We're going to use sheets. Now, who needs a pen or paper? You just need to write down 10 numbers, thereabouts. Has everyone got, I've got some pencils and things, which we can hand out. You want to pass them around? There we go. If you can just pass them around for me. Thank you. Anyone else need some? So right, before we actually start, everyone okay with a marker of some kind, their preferred device? So before you actually look at the questions, or the statements actually, you should ideally have a little tape on there. It's a sticky which you can pull off. The objective is we're going to write a number on there now, and this is not a card trick, I assure you, but we're going to write a number on there, and if you want to take note of that number yourself, put it on the paper underneath, because you're going to use that sticker to go up there. We'll shift the light round when we're ready to do that. And the reason we're going to do that is we want to look at how the diversity in this room responds to this particular set of questions. The questions take typically about between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on people and how they want to interact with the questions. I suggest this evening, because our time's limited, just go fast. Don't go too deep on the statements. But before you do you all work in one form or other with a group or a team? Anyone who works completely solo? And you don't interact with anyone at all? Clients? Can you imagine a group or team? Wonderful. Bring that one to mind. So we've got one gentleman who's got to do a bit more imagination than the rest of you. What I'd like you to do is imagine a particular team or group that you want to think about as we do this exercise. And what we're going to do is explore what the group dynamic is for that organization. It sounds wonderful, but all we're going to look at is the interpersonal relationship space, but through some very simple questions. Now, on a scale of 0 to 10, this is the number we're going to write on here, so any number from 0 to 10 is what you write on there. Would you recommend a close friend or relative to join that group, assuming they have the necessary skill sets? And the criteria here is their career and their success depends on them joining this group being successful or not. So if you've got a group, you bring it to mind. If you think it would be a great thing for them to join, assume they have all the skill sets, this is about your judgment of the group. Is this a good group for them to join on a scale of 0 to 10? 0 is don't touch the group with a barge pole. 10 is if you come here, it's going to be brilliant. Your kid is going to excel. And it can either be close friend or family member. It's about making it someone that you know and care about. Would you recommend they join the group on a scale of 0 to 10 as you think of the particular group? So if you imagine the last group. Both. The tape you'll give to me, the paper is for your reference. So 0 means you would not recommend at all. 10 is get on board quickly, and anywhere in between. That should be a fairly quick instinctive response. Okay? Now, if you would like to just read each of the statements, still thinking of that same group, and as you read each statement, put a score of 0 to 10 on each of the rows. And what we're looking for is, as you read that statement, we're talking about behaviors and how strongly do you agree with that statement or not. Strongly agree, put a 10. Don't agree at all, put a 0. And if you can rattle down both groups of questions, and what we're going to have to do is get to the average, which is going to be interesting. So those who can't naturally divide by 8, do a bit of guesswork, because we don't have calculators, but get close. Divide by 10 is awfully close to dividing by 10, but not quite the same for the purists, as we know. You can, it's amazing really, isn't it? So all we need to do now is take your sticker.
Oh yeah.
Now, so what you hear, you've got 7.25
Yep.
and 3.125.
Yep.
So 7.25, 7 and 3. Yeah.
Oh, I see, right.
So
Okay.
we're going to go 80,
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, okay.
So all we're going to do, could we rotate this light round? Thank you. We're just going to whop this on 80, okay?
Oh, okay. Right.
That's it.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Thank you.
Right, no
That's for you.
Right. Lovely.
Anyone else like to try that adventure? If you've got your numbers, all we do is we come down and we find where to put your sticker on the plot. Whoa, that's a good one.
On the back, you have that one, so yours is 9, and you've got 2.
Yep, so go over.
Go on the back, and you find
The 9.
9 and the 2.
So at 101, which is your up here. Okay. That's right, don't worry. Oh, it's
You're on 49, sorry.
okay, don't worry. There we go.
I got 3 on the far.
So what we have is an interesting spread. This is about behaviors that you perceive in the group relating to sort of potentially problematic control behaviors. Controlling almost for self-preservation. So someone's, it's really quite explicit control. And I want to make a distinction between forms of control because it can get quite confusing. I'll give you an example. I used to head up a European sales team, and we had an atrocious forecasting performance, and our sales performance was up and down like a yo-yo. And we were building product or not building product, and it was costing the organization a fortune because we didn't align forecast with reality. There was a lot of sandbagging taking place. Sandbagging is holding off on what you think will be reality so that you're good at the end of the quarter, so you don't get punished if you don't hit the target. So sandbagging is a common phenomena. It comes from the world of blame. Now, what we did, we defined as a group, we will meet every other Monday morning, And what we would do is discuss where we're doing on the sales forecast. Attending the meeting was not voluntary. You had to attend. The only reason you couldn't attend without permission was if you had a family crisis. That was the only condition. You couldn't have a client meeting. Sales guys are pretty good, and it's guys mainly, were pretty good at organising client meetings so they didn't have to attend the forecast call. It's a great get-out clause. Well, I was at the client trying to get business, sorry. No, that became a disciplinary offence. So this is a really extreme control space. But within it, there was complete openness. If you believed you would get a certain amount of business and it didn't come in and you were being transparent, that was accepted as learning and we would learn from it. But if you didn't play by certain elements of the rule book, which is every other Monday, be on the call, then the sword of Damocles would come on you. So defining control, which is giving you operational parameters, is absolutely acceptable depending on what you're doing. Health and safety, all those spaces need certain elements of control. But within the envelope of performance, can you be agile? Can you be flexible? And that's the issue of control. This type of control is not the healthy form of control. This is problematic control. Every one of those statements represents a potential problem for any group, any agile group. And they're worded deliberately. And then for those of you who are spotted, there are some opposite ends. I often get challenges that say, well, if you're asking about telling, if you're looking at the telling statement and the asking statement, well, clearly you can't have both. I'm afraid you can, because you guys have demonstrated it. Look at the spread. If you had equal telling and asking, you'd have a direct line up here, from there to there, the spread of you guys. But you've got quite a disbursement. That means you have experienced combinations of both learning and control in the same group. Now, if I move on to a project I was working on very recently, this is a group of 8 people. Each dot represents what you guys have just done. The vertical scale just takes those two and number crunches it to get to one number to go up and down the vertical. The position of 5 would mean that learning and control are equally powerful. So maybe learning is 1 and control is 1, or maybe learning is 10 and control is 10. So where they are equal, you get midpoint 5. Where control is more dominating, you come down, and where learning is more dominating, you go up from the midpoint. The environment, another 10 questions, which we don't have time for right now. I've got examples here, so you're more than welcome to take them away if you want them, because you can just do the same exercise. But you take learning and control and environment, and you find out where you are on the grid. The environment is about exploring how does a group experience the immediate environment around it. One of the big misnomers, I do a lot of work with psychometrics, and what I found is, as you look at all the psychometrics out there, most of them take one perspective. They might be looking at motivation, they might be looking at personality type or trait or behaviors. They're not looking at the other parameter called environment. And you'll find more and more people are talking about how important the environment is, because the environment directly influences what's going on within the group as well. There's a relationship. We completed a research project with the Association of Project Managers, which explicitly looked at, was there a relationship between environment and what we refer to as the group dynamic. There's a direct correlation. Now, we know correlation is not causation. I will not get into that this evening. If you want it over a beer, I'm happy to have a conversation. But there is a relationship going on between environment and group dynamic. So, if we look at the top here, we just had 8 people. They've been working together for about 4 months. There's 2 people that have come in more recently. One of them is the supervisor of the group, and one of them is home-based. Guess what you got? The perceptions of the same group are dramatic. And bear in mind, this is averaging, so it's dampened. With such big differences going on there, the same 8 people in the same group experience their environment and their group dynamic very, very differently. If you're trying to create an agile team and people are perceiving their reality very, very differently, you're going to be bumping into each other. You're not going to be picking up on the same nuances. So what we're doing with this group is, first of all, step 1 is get the awareness going, realize that everyone doesn't see the same space the same way, so different perspectives. Once you've done that, you then develop the skills, the interpersonal skills of how do I understand why I might see it this way and you might see it the other way. And rather than fight over it, just understand and be curious about the difference. A classic role of an agile coach or scrum master, by the way, offline, helping people understand what's going on in the group dynamic. And then finally, do people care enough to do anything about it? Because how many people have tried a diet, give up smoking, change, we become aware, fine. We maybe develop the skill to be able to stop doing something or change and start doing something, but do we actually do it? So that step 3 is the bit which catches most groups and organizations out. There's not an explicit focus on, and how do we get alignment of motivation to pull off the change that people want? And part of it is about getting the group to know there is difference. Difference is okay, but what might you want to do? And this is not about making everyone the same. It's about celebrating difference such that you can then agree what you want to do next. How are we doing on time? I think what I'd like to do, this will be the last slide, and I want to open up for questions. I mentioned this bottom scale, the environment dynamic. So it's just that's 10 additional questions to what you've already looked at. What we then did with this group is we got cards, you got the sheet, same statements. We went round as a group, people had the cards, and they read them out. Each would read them out, and then the group would discuss, do we see these behaviors around the group? And to what extent do they see them? And then we effectively created a score on each one. So the green pins just represent the average score for the group, and the red pins just happen to be the lowest 3, the 3 that are closest into the center. Have any of you come across a video called Drive by Daniel Pink? It's about motivation. It's brilliant. And Drive and self-deterministic theory, which is underpinning this, captures the first 6 items. And then the last 4 items are directly associated with some research we completed a couple of years back looking at resistance to change from a leader's perspective. But what was interesting, we've got an equivalent of that chart for both the learning and control, those 2 scales, and the environment. This is a group that supposedly knows each other very well. Very little came out when we were looking at the learning and control space, because they're looking inwards. How do I experience the group that I'm part of? I mean, it's safe at one level because you're saying how you perceive the group, not any one individual. As soon as we moved to outside, the floodgates opened. Well, we've got this going on, that going on, all the cards stimulated. So my observation as an external person to their group, their system, is we're much more comfortable talking about stuff outside of our own group than inside of our own group. Are we comfortable to talk about the interpersonal space, how we get on with folk? I would suggest there's a systemic weakness in the entire education system in the UK certainly, and arguably in other Western countries. We don't teach people about people. There's a novel idea. We give us loads of other skills on our journey, and we specialize. And unless you go into a speciality that will give you some of those skills, you're not going to pick them up. And it's, would you pick up calculus by osmosis, putting you in a group and learn I don't think so. There's specific skills. There are some people who naturally understand the people space intuitively. They couldn't necessarily tell you how they use it so effectively, but they're very good at doing it. And I think that's one of the challenges. And so part of this objective is to try and give people simple statements that have got robust interpersonal relationship theory underpinning it. I won't go into that this evening. Happy to talk to anyone about it if they wish. But if you embed underlying theory that's robust and proven, inherently we don't talk about the theoretical space, we're talking about the practical space. What do we see in a group? And if we ask those questions of ourselves, maybe we start to become more aware about what's going on and adjust our own capabilities and behaviors. That's a dark screen for a reason. Any questions? Okay, so have any of you heard of a term called Net Promoter Score, NPS? Okay, gentleman over there. So what NPS is, Net Promoter Score, is by scoring from 0 to 10, we just make it, we're used to scoring 0 to 10. Did I get 0 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 at school? So we're tapping into a scaling system that we all naturally have become familiar with. I framed it as a close colleague or friend. Would you recommend? That's an emotional decision that you made when you put a number on there. We're not very good about talking about emotions. So if I ask people to engage, would you, emotionally, would you want to? People are, don't know about that. I'm British, sorry, don't do that. But if I say, would you recommend, and their future depends on it, you naturally tap into the emotional part of you. And so when you score, this is actually an emotional score. So what becomes interesting is the learning dynamic for this person is 0. Not much learning is taking place, an awful lot of control is taking place. Net Promoter Score, 0. Here, got an interesting one. We've got a 0 up here as well, which is learning is really high, environment is not particularly supportive. In terms of that's control. Low control, high learning. So a 0 is a bit surprising there. So now the question is, if you were doing a workshop, I wonder why that is. Now we've got 9s, 8s, 6s, 4s, 3s, 2s, 3s. So you generally have got a low to high mix. The message is, emotionally, you as a group have been a wonderful example, because what you've said is, do you know what, in the main, with 1 or 2 exceptions, if it's a learning environment, I'd recommend. If it's a control environment, no way. Say again? Well, but what's interesting is, it's happening wherever I do it. We talk about the learning organisation of 25 years ago, which has got lost in the plot on the way, unfortunately. I was involved in a TQM company for 20 odd years. I saw it do this and then do that, which was throw out the learning organisation for a whole host of reasons. But if you get people to consciously, and it's about the conscious awareness, consciously understand these behaviours are nicer. You're more productive. We often hear about productivity. We were talking about that earlier on. They're more productive. Why wouldn't we try and make an environment where people get on with each other and talk with each other? But if we don't teach people how to talk to each other effectively, we don't understand the interpersonal space, we don't like talking about emotions, we've got all these barriers that are actually getting in our way. So this is about deceiving you, actually, because I've made it about numbers, but it's not to do with numbers at all. It's actually about, wouldn't it be nice if we could get our groups back into a learning space? Because then we would want to recommend to others it's worth joining. Or maybe we want to stay there ourselves. And this is continually coming, whichever group I work with in any discipline, same message is popping out. So this is about trying to get on the agenda. Read the statement. You can get all these statements. I've got an app, it's free, and you can download it, and all those statements are on the app. So if you want to remind yourself, keep the paper, download the app, it doesn't really matter. Don't mind. But I just found it so frustrating that some of the basics that would help us have high-performing teams, so my passion is about collaboration and high-performing teams. I've worked in one, I had the privilege, I didn't realise it at the time. It was when I left it I realised, oh, that was pretty good. How did I not realise it? Then I did quite a lot of study, in sort of about 50 onwards, and I worked out, do you know what? I don't know how to create a high-performing team. My background's electronics engineering. I started as an engineer, and it bugged me that I didn't know how to create a high-performing team. So I spent 7 years trying to work it out. And this is where I've ended up, which, 7 years and 26 questions. It seems expensive, but it's one of those things. Any other questions? The theory that this is founded on is the interpersonal space. And regardless of where you are in the structure, you still end up being human, well, most. So the fundamentals are at play. Now, if you ask, how is your peer group versus how are other groups that you perceive, you start to shift the data around. So you're quite right, you have to be careful. So there is a difference, you have to be careful that you frame it. So I tend to work on, if I'm working with any group of people, bring to mind a group that you work with, because that sort of normalizes it to an extent, because it's, wherever you are, how do I get on with these people? Because at the end of the day, the fundamental relationship model behind this is inclusion, control, and openness. We tend to think of control as step one. It's not. Inclusion is step one. If you go to, go back to good old school, what do we used to do? Send people to Coventry. Not literally, as we know. We would stop talking to someone. That's excluding. So in any relationship, inclusion is step one. Do I want to include someone, and then do I include them? Or do I want others to include me, and do they include me? Step two is control. Is the control dynamic overbearing or comforting? So some people never want to be a supervisor. Some people are desperate to be supervisors, whatever level. So is the control dynamic in balance? Same. Do I want to, do I want others, and do they? And then finally, openness. If inclusion and control are in balance, then you move to openness. What does openness get you to? Ultimately, trust. And we all hear the word trust. But hands up who think trust is an emotion. We have 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. Okay, you're getting into the subtleties of trust. But if you actually look at the definition of emotions, there is some debate about this. But if you go to the occupational psychology world and look at what are the key emotions, there's an understanding that there are 8 core emotions, and one of them is called trust. So trust is an emotion. I think because we, in the UK in particular, we have this emotional stuff, sort of leave your emotions at home. You've probably heard that or felt that somewhere. So leave trust at home and come to work. That's a really helpful thing to do, isn't it? Is anyone who put a 0 up there, are they want to volunteer? Don't have to if you don't want to. Yep. So what you're actually touching on is, you could look at the supervisor layer as the environment. You can't read you've got collaboration, communication, choice, motivation, feedback, development, monitoring, support, culture, and change. They're all actually looking at, it's not looking at the supervisor per se, but it's looking at the relationship into the immediate environment. The immediate environment around you may have the supervisor in it. So I try to make this as generic as possible, so you can choose to frame it as you wish. The other thing I do with all psychometrics, this is not a psychometric, it's just a simple thing of 26 statements, just took 7 years to create. But the main point is the answer's in the discussion that follows. This is to frame the discussion, because most people don't know how to have this discussion. And if you have a frame of reference, carry on doing it. Cool. If you don't have a frame of reference, this is designed to try and give people a frame of reference to try and put an envelope around it, to have a meaningful conversation, because ultimately the answer can only come from within the group. And if you do have a supervisor structure where there's blame in play, I have experienced the same phenomena where after a big M&A, a high-performing team struggled to survive, and it survived for 2.5 years. Then finally it realized that there's no hope. The culture of the resultant organization had changed so dramatically, the environment. The high-performing team could not do what it used to do. So it had to move into survival mode, which then means if you were to take this, you would see more of the control stuff at play. And that's the whole point. There's a relationship. And we're busy beating up people saying we should make that person better. We focus on the individual. It's not about the individual, in my personal view is. It's about the collective interrelationships that are at play. Think of the All Blacks rugby. Yes, there are individual athletes, brilliant athletes. They know when to come together as a collective. They know when to shoot off on their own. And okay, they've had a rough patch recently, but the point, even the English rugby team, if you go back when we did our stellar work as well under Clive Woodward. Athletes, individualists who work as a team. And so what I try to do is say it's about individual capability and knowing when to come together as a collective for the team objective. Yeah. So we can always, if you look at sports as a metaphor level, but we know the term Scrum in this room, yes? Do we know why it's called Scrum? Go here. It's called Scrum because in 1986, 2 guys wanted to, we have the Toyota production system, which we may be familiar with, I don't know. It came out of Deming's work with Toyota. Toyota developed a Toyota production system. From there you have Lean. Lean was 2 Americans who were then recategorizing what the Toyota production system was. So a bit of evolution on the way. 2 Japanese guys around the same time that Lean was coming up were looking at the Toyota production system and saying, how can we create product development for hardware at this point, product development that is getting the ball over the line quickly? Where did they look for inspiration? They looked at, ironically, the All Blacks back in 1986. A paper was written and published in Harvard Business Review of a new product development methodology based on Scrum techniques. 2 years later, Jeff Sutherland picked it up and said, you know what, this might be interesting in the world of software. He just happened to have 600 engineers knocking around. Thought, well, let's give it a shot. And of course, it transformed the business he was working in. Then comes the Scrum Manifesto. Or Agile Manifesto, sorry, get the right way around. So, ironically, This world of Agile goes all the way back to sports anyway, through metaphor. So I think it's like anything. If we draw comparisons, we can always sort of say, well, yes and no. My main message is, if a group doesn't know how to interact with each other, it will not be high performing, because you can't get the benefit of the collective. If it knows how to work together, you'll get the benefit of the collective. I probably went over on time, haven't I?
Do you think everyone wants to be a learning organisation?
No, absolutely not. Sometimes it's exposing to be in a learning organisation. Depends on, now you get to the personal development journey of each of us. Some people will stay their entire lives wanting to be in the control space because they feel safe by controlling others. It unfortunately creates havoc often for the other people. So it's a really interesting question. And so this is not about saying there's a right way, but if you understand, now the question is, are the right people on the bus? And sometimes they're not. It's not going to be an agile group otherwise. And I found the one organizer or the one group of people that gets this stuff are agile coaches, stroke scrum masters, because they're all about how do we get collaboration, how do we get the multidisciplinary team working together effectively. And if you don't get that going, you're screwed. And that's what that's trying to highlight. Actually, I think they have been, unfortunately. I think that you've got some extremes. You've got a few companies that are out there blazing the trail. Google, bless them, are doing so much research on analytics to try and work out what is it that makes high effective teams, high performing teams, what pods or whatever they call them. And they've concluded through their research, the topic is psychological safety. Number one dominant. If you haven't got a psychologically safe space, you don't get the ability to tune into what's going on, which means you're not going to be learning. This is a proxy, or the other one, I would suggest this is a proxy. You can look up that vertical scale and say, actually, probably those that are scoring higher on that vertical scale have an instance of higher psychological safety. As a company I'm working with, it's really weird. They want to create an innovative environment. They're not a software company, a completely different space. Yet people's heads get chopped off if they come up with ideas that don't work. Strangely, that's not going to work, as we know. So I think when people are under pressure, there's a great tendency to over-control, which I think is the sad reality. So part of what this is about is saying, if you're aware of it, you now have a choice. If you're not aware of it, you've got no choice. You'll just live with what you're doing. So, nice observation there. It dramatically. We ended up having the most accurate forecast out of the entire group, and we grew sales. We grew sales. Same number of salespeople. Because what happened is the salespeople started to talk to each other. Hang on, I've had this before, because we're so good at repeating patterns. And prospects have the same repeating patterns. But if every individual is out there learning on their own, it's a long learning journey. But if you start sharing, hang on, I've seen that before, watch out. This might be an approach you can take. Why do we have sales training? To share sales knowledge, maybe. But if you have knowledge specific to your business, rather than just technique, I would suggest you get a really big bang for your buck. And that's so you can turn a forecasting meeting into a learning experience if you get it right. But it does depend on, you might have one or two lone wolves in there who are heavily on the control and defensive space. But then that's the role of the sales manager to help change the behavior or help them find another job if that's what you think is what you want to do. And that's what we did. We had one person who didn't want to play ball. So we just had the conversation and said, look, this is how we're going to work. Do you want to be in the group or not? And they left. It's one of those things. But it can make a profound difference to the performance of the sales team. And you know what people enjoyed? Talking about successes and failures, because they learned. They didn't like the failures, clearly, but they learned from them. So they didn't get caught out again. And we had the classic rule, screw up once, that's okay, as long as you are following the basic guidelines. Screw up twice for the same mechanism, what's going on. Screw up 3 times, you're not paying attention. And then we'd have a stronger conversation. You could screw up multiple times in different areas, that was okay, but not on the same topic. So the case of if you don't learn, you're not playing the game, which is how do we up the game for the whole group. It also meant that where you normally have lone wolves in a sales team, we actually had people helping to hit the team number. So the group forecast was one number, the individual contribution was another. The classic command way is hold everyone to account for all their unique numbers. And anyone who doesn't get it in the blame culture, beat those people up, because that's a good thing to do. Versus contract with the sales team, it's the total number for the groups that are important. And yes, we accept there's going to be fluctuation going on, but let's make sure we're learning from that fluctuation. Otherwise, we don't deserve to tolerate it. That doesn't need to. What I would do so the sales team I was referring to was pan-European. And what we would do is every quarter we'd bring people together, 2 days, physically. So it depends on how big the team is. Our team was 15. So every quarter we'd bring the group together and we would spend 2 days. The first day was a retrospective. What did we say we were going to do and what did we actually do? And discuss any learnings from that. Day 2, what do we project for the next quarter? What does that mean? How are we going to get it? Test what we'd learned from day 1 on day 2. So truly do that, create that cycle. So as a sales manager, my role was to hold people to account in terms of be honest. If you didn't get something you expected, what was it? Why do we have this account that keeps being forecast at high probability and it's now in its 3rd month? Yeah, but when they're in different, okay, but you can do this virtually as well. Okay. But you can, with the tech, I mean, if you go back 20 years, the tech wasn't as good. The tech's now pretty good, yeah? What? Yeah, it's just people in different spaces, whatever their label is, really. So you can do this with virtual. You put Zoom or something up where you've got a professional system, you've got your 8 faces knocking around. There are also, there's Clive Woodward's got his app called Hive Learning, which is designed to share wherever you are on the globe, which is something we use as well. Agreed. But if you take, if you have a look at Hive Learning, it solves that problem. It basically creates collective synchronous and asynchronous communication between people. It solves that problem. It really does. You know, I've been working, so electronics engineer originally, run a technical support group, pan-European. How do you synchronize the service engineers to learn from each other so they're not all trying to solve the same damn problem? They're all inventing a new solution, which is typically what happens. So if you're going to waste I basically say I work with organizations that care about collaboration. If they don't care about collaboration, I'm not staying. Because my work only works if the organization cares about collaboration. It's quite a nice way to finish, I think. Thank you very much.